By now you've been gagged for singing, fined for too lively hair, and possibly shamed by a candle in the town square. But here comes a curveball. What if your outfit, yes, that ruffled sleeve or embroidered handkerchief, was considered legally dangerous? In 18th century France, clothing wasn't just fashion, it was messaging, and the laws written to control what people wore could get oddly specific and sometimes downright surreal. Imagine standing in front of your wardrobe, carefully selecting an outfit, not just for the weather or the occasion, but for how closely it followed the law. Because in certain corners of France, what you wore could send a message you never intended. A green sash might imply loyalty to a radical guild. A red ribbon might be seen as a silent protest. And wearing too much lace? That was a surefire way to get accused of pretending to be nobility. Clothes had implications, and the authorities were watching. These weren't your standard sumptuary laws, the kind that try to keep commoners from dressing above their station, although those certainly existed too. No, we're talking about a more covert layer of control. Laws that tried to police the hidden messages woven into clothing, both literally and symbolically. Embroidered initials, forbidden colors, specific weaves. Each became grounds for suspicion, especially in the years leading up to the revolution. That let's start with a strange favorite, the illegal scarf knot. Yes, that's real. In Paris, some municipal laws briefly forbade tying scarves in a specific diagonal fold that had become associated with a secret society known for mocking the king. It seems absurd, an entire ordinance just to outlaw a type of knot, but magistrates feared that such seemingly innocent symbols could rally dissenters. One man was reportedly stopped and interrogated for wearing a side-fold cravat with red threading. He was carrying fish, but the cravat was enough to warrant suspicion. This kind of symbolic overreach wasn't limited to scarves. Buttons became controversial. In some cities, buttons engraved with slogans, guild symbols, or political allegories were banned altogether. Historians still argue whether these fashion laws were sincerely about preserving order or just a panic-fueled response to a growing public voice. After all, if someone's coat button says justice, is that treason or tailoring? Take, for example, the curious case of protest petticoats. In Lyon and Avignon, women in certain weaving communities began lining their underskirts with fabric printed with political verses you could only read if the skirt was lifted. It was a sly form of protest, and a funny one, too. Officials soon caught on and began randomly inspecting petticoats, prompting women to layer decoy verses over the real ones. It was poetry warfare, hidden under layers of linen. Naturally, the authorities responded by trying to outlaw specific patterns. In a 1779 edict, tailors in one region were instructed not to produce garments using a repeated triangle motif, which had become associated with anti-clerical sentiment. Triangle patterns, outlawed. You can almost hear the poor seamstress sighing as she unpicks another row of stitching. And of course, no conversation about these laws would be complete without mentioning shoes. In one coastal province, wooden clogs, sabots, became a symbol of solidarity among discontented workers. When worn with mismatched laces or notched heels, they signaled support for local labor uprisings. Soon, the authorities weren't just regulating footwear, they were inspecting it. There were reports of soldiers stopping citizens to examine their shoes, measuring heel grooves like detectives. One man was fined because his boots creaked with intentional rhythm. We're not making this up. What makes all this even more ridiculous, and somehow wonderful, is that the people found endless, cheeky ways to comply while still subverting the rules. Hats became coded. Women would tie hair ribbons in certain directions to indicate their opinion on local taxes. Men stitched tiny symbols into the lining of their coats, messages that were only revealed if they opened them dramatically, which they often did just to make a point. The laws kept coming, and the people just got more creative. Historians now point to this period as one where clothing became language. There was an entire cultural dialect being stitched, buttoned, hemmed, and folded into everyday wear. And while the laws tried desperately to erase that dialect, they never quite could. Every new restriction just created a new kind of poetry, a new kind of joke, a new kind of whisper in fabric form. One magistrate in Bordeaux, clearly exasperated, wrote in a report, "If they cannot say it with mouths, they now say it with seams. We are outnumbered by thread. Honestly, give that man a nap." Now, these legal anxieties were especially heightened as the revolution approached. In the 1780s, the rise of the sans-culottes, those working-class citizens who rejected aristocratic fashion, triggered a reverse panic. Suddenly, not dressing fancy enough could be seen as suspicious. Were you secretly a radical? Why weren't you wearing lace? Did your plain linen shirt mean you hated the monarchy? So yes, in a bizarre twist, it became legally risky to be too elegant in one town and not elegant enough in the next. Some traveling salesmen kept multiple outfits in their carts. Costume changes on demand, depending on the street they were on. One tailor even offered a reversible coat, velvet brocade on one side, plain wool on the other. Ideal for avoiding suspicion at crossroads. This contradiction, where clothing laws pulled in opposite directions, mirrored the larger confusion of the time. Who were you allowed to be? What were you allowed to say? If your shirt, scarf, or shoes could betray your loyalties, how could you trust anything to be neutral? It was an age of whispers, and your outfit was shouting. But even amid the absurdity, there's something oddly hopeful here. People kept finding ways to express themselves. They stitched rebellion into seams. They wore their satire, quite literally, on their sleeves. The law tried to contain the human spirit inside doublets and cravats, and utterly failed. And with that, let's turn to something softer, how the government tried and failed to regulate naps.